Welcome, seekers of knowledge, to another episode of Your Pocket DPO with your host, Alexandra Stanford. This podcast is your one-stop center for everything data protection related. And this week, I'm introducing a new segment in which I interview various privacy professionals about their opinions and contributions to privacy and data protection. Today, I have the honor to interview Dr. Norman Sadeh from Carnegie Mellon University and Sadeh Consulting. Hi, Norman. Thank you for joining me today to discuss more in depth the Internet of Things privacy infrastructure. Before we begin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself to the audience members that do not know you or are not familiar with your work?
Hello, Alexandria. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast today. Yes, I'm happy to say a few words about myself and obviously want to keep this interactive. I'm a professor of computer science here at Carnegie Mellon. I've been in the US for many years, but I'm originally from Belgium. That's where I was born and that's where I grew up. My name doesn't say so. Then I did my graduate studies here in the United States and then stayed on the faculty at Carnegie Mellon University after finishing my PhD in computer science and AI there back a long time ago. Eventually, I found my way back to Europe, worked for the European Commission for a few years. In the late 90s, I was chief scientist of the EU initiative in e-commerce, which included all pan-European cybersecurity and privacy work and a lot more. And then since about 2000, I've been back here at Carnegie Mellon doing a lot of work in areas like privacy, cybersecurity, AI governance, and so on. And so along the way, I started a program in privacy engineering, which is, I believe, the first and by and large considered to be the program in privacy engineering today in the world. We've been very successful. Our graduates are working for many of the usual suspects and as well as lesser known organizations, including government organizations in the US and abroad as well. I'm also a bit of an entrepreneur, so I've got a reasonable sense for how things work in industry. You mentioned Sadeh Consulting. I've done consulting as well. On the entrepreneurship side, besides leading an MBA track in our business school for many years, so even though I'm a computer science professor, they allowed me to do that because they seem to think that I knew enough about the business side of things to let me do that. So one of my startups was called Wombat Security Technologies, focusing on the human element in cybersecurity, sort of pioneered this new segment of the market and effectively creating what is today a multi-billion-dollar market. We sold our company for about $250 million about 6 years ago now to Proofpoint, which is one of the larger cybersecurity companies. And then Proofpoint itself got acquired for about $12 billion about 2 years ago at this point. So we've got tens of millions of people using that technology. So I've got some familiarity with what it means to develop also technology at scale through consulting, but also through companies that I led. I was the founding CEO and chairman and chief scientist of Wombat. So that's hopefully enough to get the conversation going.
Well,
again, thank you for the show and very much looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. And I am thankful for that introduction because there's a lot about your experience that I was not aware of, your European experience specifically. So it means that this conversation will definitely be one that would ensure that the audience knows that the infrastructure you have built has been thoroughly thought through and complies with the GDPR and all of its requirements. So
we do our best. We do our best. As I tell people, honestly, is privacy, just as AI governance, is always a journey. It's not a destination. And even if you think you're there, sometimes you're surprised to find out that you're not. And sometimes the world keeps on shifting. And while you were there yesterday, you're no longer there today. So
yes.
you're never.
Yes, definitely. As a privacy researcher myself, I just conducted a project, and I must say the results surprised me even, thinking that, hey, this could solve the problem. But then as I got more opinions from young people, from Gen Zs and Millennials, you see, hey, what I was thinking before might not work and things need to be tweaked a little bit. And I also got opinions from them of what I could do to help them. And I must say that it proves that, like you said, it's a journey. It's something that is ever revolving. It's something that absolutely continuously changes. So, on that, I must say that leads me to my first question, which is regarding the environment that we're in, the economy that we're in. It's what a lot of privacy experts and Professor Zuboff, in her book, Surveillance Capitalism, basically describes the economy as one that is data related. And all the commodities and all of the products that are being created are based off of data that was analyzed. And I'm just wondering, in this economy, has the proverbial cow already left the barn, leaving little level privacy to even be protected?
Well, so we are definitely living in a data-centric economy. As you pointed out, every product, every service, every business process out there relies on the collection of data, and often that includes sensitive personal data. Has the cow left the barn? Some cows have left the barn, but I think we can bring them back in. And I think that we have this privacy engineering program here at Carnegie Mellon. Our logo includes privacy is not dead. It's actually privacy is dead, and then we add not in red. And so we believe that it's a lot of work, obviously, for everyone to get, back, regain some control over all. And, thanks in part to European leadership, we've seen new regulations that, have been prompted by everything that has happened since, in particular, the emergence of the internet or the web, I should say, mobile apps, social networks, social media, and so on, and the Internet of Things as well. And so, obviously, as you know, our GDPR has had a massive impact, not just in Europe, but across the world. And we've seen this at the level of our privacy engineering program with, a huge increase in number of people who want to interact with us, companies that come to us with capstone projects that we get our students to work on, for them to complete their degree. We've seen, obviously, the demand for privacy engineers shoot up since GDPR was introduced, and even a bit before, as companies start to realize that they were in trouble. And so I think now with AI governance, we're seeing basically that trend continuing. Does this mean that all the cows will make it back into the barn? As you said, we'll only use this analogy for so long, but I think that obviously these regulations are somewhat aspirational at times. You just look at the EU AI Act right now, and there are provisions, right, that nobody dares to, enforce right away. So you've got like a few years. We'll eventually figure out how to do this, but please warn you that it's coming, and then we'll let you know exactly what we're expecting once we figure it out. And the same is even true today for GDPR and other privacy regulations. As you know, you look at, for instance, California here in the US, which has led the way, on our side of the ocean. And they've introduced many provisions, right, going back to 2020, that have also taken a few years to come into force. And so there is this desire, right, and which is great. And there is, a reasonable level of political will. Privacy in the US is actually a bipartisan topic.
Wow.
We actually right now in the United States Congress looking at some new proposals.
Yes, the American Privacy Rights Act, I believe.
So yes, this is under consideration. There was another one that unfortunately didn't make it a year and a half ago. But yes, I think there's still a chance that something like that might happen at the federal level. In the meantime, states here in the US, about I think 14 states last I checked, have actually passed laws, starting with California, but a number of other states have come up with somewhat, similar types of frameworks. So there is this trend, right, and these regulations, but these regulations are not the whole story, right? A lot of the work that I do is, I think your background is a legal background, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Right. So I interact a lot with attorneys, lots of joint research projects where we try to bring in our expertise coming from the computer science world, the AI world, the private engineering world, and relying on people who understand the law better than I do. I can pretend for a few minutes and then quickly I will embarrass myself, to be perfectly honest. So, but what I do is I try to see how we can potentially, number one, push the envelope, potentially inform, future regulations, interpretations of regulations, and also move from the aspirational to the practical, right? So look at, a lot of the language, in regulations like GDPR, like, even the notion of informed consent, right? Or so you've got, discussions about or provisions against, effectively dark patterns, manipulative patterns, and the like. Those things are very loosely specified, right? It's needs ultimately for research to better understand, how you organize this space and how you define what's acceptable, what's not, and how you get these definitions themselves to evolve over time as we become more sophisticated in terms of helping organizations, again, in a practical context. We can come up with, perfect regulations if nobody, another product, but that's not going to happen. And so we need to make sure that what we're requesting, from a regulatory standpoint, is nevertheless practical, doesn't give too fair an advantage also to those very, very large organizations that have significantly more sophistication and access to, significantly larger amount of resources than the smaller organizations that ultimately are the source of innovation. And so it's a tough balancing act for sure. And, that's where we try to position ourselves here, at least as far as our research is concerned at Carnegie Mellon. In particular, I've been around, I've been going around for a number of years now, telling people that, the biggest challenge from my perspective when it comes to privacy is usability, right? And I'd like to illustrate this with a very, a small number of examples. Like GDPR is great, right? It requires people to disclose so much more than what they were required to disclose before. But the consequence of that is that the length of privacy policies has gone up. And as you and I know, except for attorneys, nobody reads privacy policies. And so getting the privacy policies to become longer will only help customers so far. It helps them in case they've got to hire an attorney, that, and those issues. But in terms of informing me on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't help. Right, so we need other techniques. These controls that we have, right, obviously providing consent, in Europe, opting out more often, here in the US, deletion, portability, you name it, those rights are great, right? But, do you actually have people's, do people have the time? Do they have the motivation? Do they have the ability to actually take advantage of rights? More often than not, you find that these interfaces that are made available to people are just there, some boxes that are not really very usable. And so, I look at a typical mobile app user. That's a space in which I've done a lot of work. A typical mobile app user will probably have to configure about 200 privacy settings, right, to align their mobile app permissions with their preferences, right? I'm talking about someone who might have 100 apps on their cell phones. Some people have way more than that. A few people still have fewer. How many people have the time to configure all these settings? And so there's a huge need here to build on these regulations, build a layer of technology, methodologies that will help people bridge the gap between these aspirations and these obligations at some level being introduced by these regulations, and what people ultimately are capable of doing, and what they'll actually need if they are to really take full advantage of this progress that we've made with these regulations. So I believe that, there's a path towards bringing the cows back into the barn, and that will be the last time I use the analogy. It's not an easy path, right? It's not, they're not going to all come back tomorrow. They may never potentially come back, all of them. But I think we have certainly room, right, to bring back a good number of them, or, even if that means maybe, making the barn a bit larger so that they fit in. I think, we've gone very far in the wrong direction, right? I mean, you mentioned Zubov's, book, and there are, a number of other books that have been written. We've done, published many papers illustrating how much data is being leaked, and all the the data flows, that the collection of these data gives rise to the billion-dollar industry that has emerged from all that, the financial interest that companies have in perpetuating those practices. That's obviously a very strong force to contend with. And it's a very big ship to right.
It is.
But I think we're moving in a better direction than we were perhaps before GDPR.
Definitely. On this topic, the European Union actually saw an interplay between competition law and data protection, and how basically looking to see if how a company has infringed on any competition law, they need to take into account data protection law. So you see how, going on what you just said, how important data protection is actually becoming in this economy. And going off of what you said regarding building off of the regulations and building technologies off of the regulations so that the cows can enter the barn again. I got a question from a colleague, Dr. Aurelia Tamo, and she basically was wondering, can the IoT privacy infrastructure be translated into policy measures? And go a bit further as to, can we as professionals in the field transition from engineering-based regulation approaches to regulation-based engineering approaches so that compliance can be met without so many issues?
All right. So let me try to answer the last part of your question first. But I think to answer the first part, we'll probably need to introduce also the IoT privacy infrastructure, which we've not talked about. So yes, I think that there is a lot of room for engineering and regulation and the legal side of things to come together. We've been actually doing a good bit of work in that space. We were among the first ones to build tools to try and automate compliance analysis. For instance, in the mobile app space, my group pioneered, going back almost 10 years now, the development of technology that, using natural language processing, automatically reads the text of a privacy policy, looks at the disclosures that are being made, as well as non-disclosures, right? As you know, privacy policies, it's not just what's being said, it's also what is not being said. And then comparing that, for instance, with the code of a mobile app. So eventually in 2019, we published a study where we had analyzed a little over 1 million apps on the Android Play Store, looked at the code of these apps. We can do that as researchers here in the US, so without getting in jail, and looking obviously at those privacy policies. And, I don't know if you are familiar with that work, but we got quite a bit of attention when we published the results, because out of, I think it was 1,035,000 apps that we analyzed, we had a little over 600,000 apps that seemed to be non-compliant. If I remember correctly, the average number of likely, you cannot determine this for sure until you've got a manual, vetting of these results. But actually, manually, we did some spot checking, and the results were very high fidelity, very high quality. We had, I believe, I don't remember if it was 3 point something or 4 point something compliance issues per app, just to give you a sense for what we're talking about. And, we continue to see those things today. What we see also, and this is progress, right? This is how research, I think, has actually informed, a variety of different developments over the years. So we have regular interactions with people at companies like Apple, Google, Meta, you name them, as well as, people in Vienna. So we actually talk to everybody. And I know that the people on the West Coast read our papers, they hire many of our students, and they've actually, acknowledged that our research has had an impact on a variety of different things that they've been doing over the years. So there are now, so Google has a startup that is actually, it's an internal startup called Checks, that's using many of the kinds of technologies that we develop to support app development. increase the chance that they're going to be compliant. The app stores themselves now require many more disclosures. As you know, the privacy labels that have been introduced in app stores, that's actually coming out straight off research at Carnegie Mellon. My collaborator, Laurie Craner, started exploring that concept in 2008, 2009. Eventually, we looked together at, how these privacy labels could be applied in the context of mobile apps. We had a paper published at a top conference in 2013. And then in 2019, Apple called us and said, we like what you did. We're actually going to introduce that. So those things are happening. So going back to the question that you asked, right? Can engineering and law work together? Can we establish some synergies, which I think was the crux of your question, if I'm not mistaken? Yes, I believe that there are lots of different ways of trying to capture these regulatory requirements in terms of engineering requirements, develop tools to either automatically identify potential compliance issues. The technology we've developed in this space, to continue with this example, is not just intended for regulators or not just intended for app stores. We've also deployed versions of this technology to specifically help developers, right? So it's not about catching the developers. The developers, in ways, are often the poor guys in this. They're obviously there are very large companies out there with massive resources, but your typical developer is, a couple of guys in a garage. They don't have money to hire a lawyer. They don't understand very much about privacy, and they do need all the support they can get. And so we've been advocating now for, over 10 years, the need for the big players in this ecosystem, namely app stores, to provide better support for the developers in the form of tools. We've developed some of these tools that we've made available to help developers as they build their app and they're working on their privacy policy, whether by themselves or potentially with some ideally with some legal support, because nobody can write a privacy policy without some legal help.
Definitely.
You would need it. But building tools that can help those two sides talk to one another so that when the attorney says something, it just doesn't,
pass over.
Of the developer says, oh yeah, I'm really just fine there. And then the developer says something to the attorney and the attorney says, yeah, that sounds fine too. In truth, they're really digging a hole for themselves. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but there's a lot more I could say, but I would like to give you a chance maybe to move on to the next question. Or maybe we should talk about the privacy infrastructure, which was the first part of that question you asked.
Yes, so can you tell us what inspired the privacy infrastructure and a little bit of an overview of the privacy infrastructure?
Yes. So as I mentioned, a lot of the work I did in privacy during the, between, I would say, 2010 and still today, had, revolved around the mobile app space. And within that space, right, so we conducted studies that led to a variety of different technologies that are now commonly used, like your permission, dashboard and, background, reminders and nudges and those kinds of things. But one of the nice things, so even though mobile app is super challenging from a privacy standpoint, and it's huge just because of the number of smartphone users you've got out there and how popular all these apps are. But mobile apps are still easy in a way, even though they're not. But they're still easy in the sense that I, as a user, right, in principle, know all the apps that I've got on my smartphone, right? I can look at those screens. Nowadays, I've got to go potentially through a few screens to get the full sense. I'll also have a dashboard where I can access my privacy permissions or my privacy settings. They're called privacy settings in iOS. They're called permissions in Android. I can look at those things all in one place and control that. Now, when you start moving into, the Internet of Things, the camera that you pass in front of, the microphone that's, in a room, the Bluetooth, tracking that takes place at a store is carried out by devices that you don't even know are there, right? That's a completely different, level of challenge from, number one, a usability standpoint. And, when it comes to obviously notifying people that, hey, there is this thing there, this is the data it collects, right? Ideally, this is the purpose for which it collects it, like, requirements under GDPR, under CCPA, and so on. And by the way, if you want to, opt in, or you want to opt out, or you want to request deletion of your data, here's how you do it, right? How do you do that today? There's no solution for this. And so back in 2014, 2015, I decided that I was going to try to address that challenge. And so I asked myself, well, how do we do this, right? How can we address this? And at the end of the day, it's all about trying to bring everything back, to ideally single screen, a single process, a uniform process, right? The nice things about controlling the privacy settings on my phone is that it doesn't matter if it's, Google Maps, or if it's, Uber, or some random app from someone that we've never heard of before. At the end of the day, the interface that iOS offers, or that Android offers, is identical for interacting with all these different apps. So there's a uniform process. If you want, there's a one-stop shop process, right, where you can access all these different settings. And so I thought to myself, could we somehow recreate that sort of experience in the context of IoT, right? And so obviously, we don't have an iOS operating system really for IoT. So what you need to do is you need to rely on people who are deploying these resources, right? Disclosing the presence of their resources, including the range within which these resources might be collecting data, what data is being collected for what purpose, and what settings are potentially being made available. And you need to capture that in a uniform format so that I can, store all this in a uniform manner, and then I can empower people through a mobile app on their phone to check what's around them. And if they decide that they want to interact with some of these settings, also, opt in, opt out, request deletion of their data, portability, what have you, and provide this information also in a succinct manner. It's not about telling people, look, there's this app, and if you want, you can read the full privacy policy on your cell phone. Good luck with that, right? So it's about also using what we call privacy labels that are sort of succinct summaries of key practices that we know people care about. You always have a link to the privacy policy, right? So legally, you have, so those privacy labels, these interfaces, are not intended to replace what is required anyway, but they're intended to provide users with a significantly enhanced experience, so that not just ticking the boxes, you're truly empowering people to discover the presence of these resources, learn about their data practices, interact with the settings that are being made available. So the IoT Privacy Infrastructure is that. This is an infrastructure that we developed over a number of years, and that was launched in 2020. Unfortunately, we launched this right around the time when COVID started. Timing was not ideal because most of this, as you know, is truly, in public spaces, outdoor environments, those kinds of things. And so our timing was not optimal, but we've continued to work on this. We've got now, so this infrastructure consists of a portal that want to disclose the presence of the IoT. We call them resources. That means a device, a system, service. That's what we mean by resource, that collects some sensitive data. We enable people to create an account and start specifying what resources are under their control, what is due, what settings they are making available to people. We require people, right? This is a tricky game to play, right? We don't want to assume responsibility for what some random person is going to state they've deployed. So you got to worry about, obviously, security issues of not trying to, spam the system, disclose things that are incorrect. And so obviously we want to authenticate anyone who's going to be publishing something. We want them to sign, or this is information is provided to the best of their knowledge, their committee. We also enable people to act as curator for many resources. So we don't want to do every single resource, and in fact, we don't take responsibility, but even having the ability to do a bit more checking is really, in a world where you've got tens of billions of IoT devices, that's a little bit beyond the time I've got available. And my team is very small. We're a university. So we realized that there was this need for what we call a registry. right? And a registry is basically a collection of related resources. Like if you are a mall operator, if you are a university campus, if you're a stadium, if you're a neighborhood, right? We want you to say, hey, could we get a registry where we take responsibility for the publication of resources? Some of these resources we might enter ourselves, but some of these other resources might be provided by people who request permission to publish through our registry. And we, as registry owner, will then take responsibility for vetting these people. There will be a process. So our infrastructure already requires anyone who wants to publish to confirm, number one, to authenticate. We try to verify who people are. So when someone is asking for registry, we vet them, right? And we reserve the right to ask as many questions as we want before someone. So, we've had, obviously, as you can imagine, a variety of different fictitious requests. People pretending to be the NSA, saying, "Oh, do you mind giving me a registry for the area around Fort Meade? This is my Gmail address." Yeah, no, sorry, I don't think so. But so there is a vetting process, but we also, support delegation, right? A mall operator will probably want to be responsible for what gets published within the area of the mall. It doesn't mean that people have to go through that mall operator. So we allow for overlapping registries. So you might have a city that, potentially, has been granted the ability to publish for the entire city area. Within that city, you might have a mall operator. And then a store within that mall could conceivably publish through the mall operator, through the city, or also on their own. We support self-publication as well. So it's a fairly involved infrastructure. We looked at this from a security standpoint, as well as a privacy standpoint, obviously. We're also even allowing for what we call volunteer contributors, but we distinguish between disclosures made by volunteer contributors and people say, "I own this resource, I'm the controller," right? A contributor, well, I'm not sure who, you can see for yourself whether or not you trust the person who's published something. And, if it's a random person, you don't necessarily, give it as much weight as, a university or mall operator, a city. So that's one side of the infrastructure. The other side of this infrastructure is the mobile app. We call it the IoT Assistant app. And this app can work in a number of different ways, but it's essentially intended to help people discover what's around them. So you don't necessarily have to provide your location to the app. But then if you don't provide your location, you've got to manually adjust, location on an app. And you can, declare that, I can declare that I'm on the West Coast. I'm in Pittsburgh. But if I want to, I can position myself on the West Coast and say, "Hey, show me what's around me at this location in California." And it's going to do it, right? But you also have the option, if you want to say, "I would like this to be location sensitive." And what you do is you make your location available to the app solely for the purpose of identifying what's around you. This location will be used to query the infrastructure and get a collection of resources within a certain range, right? That location is forgotten as soon as that request has been served. So nothing is collected. It's being returned to the app. In the app, you display this, but all the information we collect otherwise is basically stored locally in the mobile apps database. And we only keep things obviously for as long as needed and as little time as needed. So that's in a nutshell how that works. So the mobile app, we spend a lot of time designing this to make it engaging. Would you like me to share my screen and play a video? I mean, is this something that your viewers would enjoy?
I think so. Yes, I think to see something more hands-on, definitely.
It's a lot of talking, right? So, this guy trying to put me asleep here. He's talking. So maybe we should show something. Let me see if I can do that. So I'm going to be sharing my screen here with your. Can I share my? I guess I'm the. Yes. I'm the host.
Yes. So it should be share and done.
Good. So this is actually the portal. This is what it looks like. And so anyone can create an account here, and then they can log in if they want to. We've got over 100,000 IoT resources that have been published. And you can also download the app, which is available in iOS and Android. But I've got two short videos here. This one is 1 minute, and this one is 2 minutes. The 1 minute version just describes the app. We're not a company. This is done by Carnegie Mellon, but we've got a very good design school. And so I was lucky enough to have a very nice design student who put together these videos for me. So I'll just go ahead and play this video.
Sure.
Hope you'll hear the sound, and I'm just gonna start playing that right now.
Our environment is becoming increasingly filled with technology that tracks more data about you. And most of the time, you can't even see them. So that's why the Internet of Things Assistant is here. It will help you have greater privacy and control of data collected about you. The assistant lives on a vibrant yet familiar interface that uses a map to show nearby data collection. By tapping on a ping, you can easily learn more about a device and even control what data is collected. With our new notifications feature, you'll be notified of any devices that you come in contact with. You can even customize when and what you want to be notified for. Now, being notified about data collection has never been easier. The Internet of Things Assistant is available on the Apple App Store and Google Play Store now, and we hope to see you there.
So, if I am correct, this IoT assistant is also known as the personalized privacy assistant. And I believe earlier you were discussing about a registry, and that one is called the IoT Resource Registry.
That's a bit
So,
of mark.
one more component of the privacy infrastructure is the enforcement point. That one I'm not too clear on after reading resources regarding it. Can you go a little bit into detail regarding
Yeah.
how that functions?
Right. So when we build this infrastructure, right, it was, it's super clear that we are not the controllers of all these IoT resources out there, right? So what we do is actually, let me see, I can probably connect to the system. But what we do is in the portal, we've got a wizard that's going to walk you, someone who wants to disclose the presence of a resource that they've deployed. We've got a wizard that allows you to specify different things, including URLs for basically the place that you're going to go to interact with the controller of that resource. And, indicate that you want to opt in, indicate that you want to opt out, request deletion, portability, whatever right that, entity decides to support. But this is out of our control, right? And so what we do is we just advertise, right, this URL that you can connect to, and then we transfer you to that. At that point, you get transferred to the browser, and you interact with that other entity. That other entity decides how they want to authenticate you. They better authenticate you, obviously, but we don't even authenticate you right now. We are working on a version where we might authenticate you, because at the end of the day, from a usability standpoint, if we could authenticate all users and establish a trust relationship with all the data collectors, we could effectively act right as an authorized agent that's submitting requests on behalf of users. So that's the future. That's where we're moving. But right now, the version that's out there, we're basically connecting you to that website. We're telling you, what options are available. Then you interact with that entity. We do request the entity to send us back some information about what choices you might have submitted. That is stored totally on the mobile app, in the database of the mobile app itself, not accessible by anyone, encrypted. And we do that for the purpose of, again, allowing someone who connects again to the same resource to remember, I've already requested to opt in or to opt out. And so there is a lot of value in caching that, and going back systematically to that other entity, which could conceivably be down. There could be some lags. And so we're keeping that, but that's only stored locally right now.
Okay.
So that's that. I've got a 2-minute video if you want more, or we can potentially more. Then when you're tired of talking, I can show you another video.
Well, I think for time, I still have a lot of questions to ask you because this is so fascinating to me. I think we will save the video until the end. Regarding the registry, you said that schools, cities, these communities can basically register the IoTs in the area to let users know what IoTs could be potentially collecting their data and using their data. I'm wondering, you have gathered a lot of resources in the years that it has been published. I'm wondering, what do you think the incentive is for these cities, universities, businesses to register within your registry?
All right. So several, it would be nice if the law required it, but we're not counting on that. But the law helps, right? So, you look at Europe and, it's an opt-in regime, using US terminology. You have a lot of incentives, right, at the controller to try to get that consent, right? So how do you present that consent? What sort of interface do you offer in an IoT context? There is no uniform way for doing that today. So I think, from that perspective in Europe, I think that there are actually good incentives for people who want to adopt. What is the alternative, right? So if you don't use our technology, what's the other way that you can do this? Well, the other way is you could obviously have an existing relationship with a customer, right? And where perhaps they've gone to a portal for your company and they've indicated that they agree. You could also have a QR code or, some very big QR code in a room. And then I could go with my QR code, and that QR code could connect me to a website or to an app. Our technology actually works with QR codes too. So we have so it's not incompatible. So we tell people to post these QR codes. They already have our app. Then when they scan the QR code, our app launches and they connect directly to the description of that resource. If they don't have our app, then they are told to download the app if they want to. And then once they've downloaded the app, we automatically bring them to that resource. Excuse me for a minute. I will continue. This is what happens to professors who speak a lot. So there is that motivation. Even in California, if you want to support opt-out, the law actually requires you to make these privacy choices prominent, easy, accessible. And so you could certainly argue that, a QR code perhaps will work, but we certainly know from our research that most people don't know these QR codes. And it's not the most easily, format, because if once you, see the QR code, you still have to authenticate the user. There are many more steps that are required. Or app, on the other hand, if you select, to have location-based notifications, purely again, the purpose of managing your privacy, you will not have to find a QR code, right? I mean, my watch vibrates and tells me if I want it to, or my app will tell me, and then I can, directly connect to a description of that app, look at the privacy labels that tell me the key things I want to know about, and then I can directly access those privacy choices that are being made available. So I think even from the perspective of CCPA, does require, it has some of these usability requirements. These requirements, as far as I can tell, will evolve over time, right? So right now you can get away with not doing very much. Perhaps the QR codes are okay. I think some of these cases will eventually be, but increasingly I expect that people will say that's not enough, right? There's a good chance nobody's going to notice these QR codes. Imagine a city, right, where you've got, sensors all over the place. Where do you even put these QR codes? It's not entirely obvious. Yeah. How do you even know which QR code to look at for which resource? It's not
it gets
usable.
Confusing, yeah.
But honestly, I've been thinking very hard about this, and I don't think there's a better solution than ours. I'm not saying that someone, cannot potentially replicate something, build something similar, but I think this is really the way to go. I'm completely convinced about that. Does this answer? So there is that, and then beyond that, there are always early adopters, people who care about, doing things right for their customers, distinguishing themselves, building a brand based on their approach to privacy. So that's where we see some of
yeah.
the track, I believe. I can continue talking. I've got a few more things I would like to say, but I'll let you jump to the next question.
And my next question is towards the app. Basically, this app is for users to manage the data collection, to opt in, opt out content, all of that stuff. And I'm wondering, how does the app help users? This might seem redundant, but just for my audience to be sure, how does the app help manage their privacy?
Yes. Well, it helps you in two different ways, right? So it's about notice and choice in a way. I mean, I realize the term is obviously very loaded these days, but it's about enabling people. It's about transparency and agency, if you want to use loaded terms. Transparency, enabling people to learn about data being collected about them, purposes, those data practices. It's about enabling them to, get meaningful summaries in the form of privacy labels, right, that are succinct summaries of data practices. They want to go crazy. There's always a link to a privacy policy, but it's there because we feel that we might as well provide it, but we're not expecting too many people to click on that link. From an agency standpoint, right, it's about giving people a practical way of accessing those rights that, are granted to them by laws, but which from a practical standpoint, they're enabled to access. Enabling them to also do that in context, in real time, right? If something that you're upset about, as you cross the street or something like that, what are the chances you're going to remember that when you get home, right? And on the fact that you didn't like the fact that you saw that. Now, if it's just a click, or potentially better, as we move towards, what you refer to as personalized privacy assistance, I mean, our research, we've done a lot of research in this space to also understand how people feel about these scenarios. As it turns out, people have diverse preferences. So are upset about some scenarios, other people are not upset about other scenarios. But individually, people also show a great deal of consistency in their preferences. That means that, if you don't like facial recognition to be used, at Starbucks to give you coupons, you probably don't like facial recognition being used at, McDonald's either, right? And so, should you be required to manually say, oh, opt me out of, this Starbucks and that Starbucks and this McDonald's and that McDonald's? I don't think that that's the way to go. Just going back to the pop-ups, the cookie pop-ups, where I said, you should be able to enter those preferences once in your browser and benefit from that. You should be able to enter preferences that are likely to apply uniformly across many scenarios once, right, in your IoT assistant, and then let your IoT assistant in the background actually discover these resources and submit your preferences, the fact that you want to opt out or that you want to opt in. And if it's a new scenario that you've never run into, then we're going to prompt you and ask you for a response. But 99% of the time, the scenarios will be scenarios for which you've already specified a very, very similar preference. And so I think now all of a sudden we find ourselves, in a position where, assuming that we can get enough of these, and there's still the question, but assuming that we can get enough players on board, we could get into a position where there's a very seamless experience for users. Right? There's minimal disruption. They're only informed about things that they would want to know about, things that would surprise them. They're only being bugged to provide, settings for cases they've not encountered before. And then also have perhaps, some kind of a dashboard, again, going back to things that have worked very well in mobile apps, where they can review also what information potentially might have been collected about them over the past days that might motivate them to revisit earlier choices and then fine-tune some of their settings. So that's the vision, and that's where we're hoping to go. We're not entirely there yet. The version that's out there today requires more manual intervention, but I think it does a job already at with the discovery and providing people with access to this information about those resources.
Another question I have regarding the mobile app is accessibility options. I know that within the industry, especially right now, how consent is being received by companies, it's mostly biased to persons who are able-bodied. And I'm wondering how your app can help ensure that everyone who is using the internet can have their consent be given, and for them to know what data is actually being collected and consent to everything that is being done regarding their identity.
That's a very good question, and that's a very important issue. We've actually done some studies, where we've tried to understand also the perspective of people who are visually impaired in particular. We had a publication not too long ago on one of those studies. And clearly, if you're visually impaired, you're not only at a disadvantage when it comes to understanding what the privacy policy says, but you also, in an IoT context, we feel challenged because we're not sure that we're going to see that camera, right? If you're visually impaired, chance that you're going to see that camera are, null or very close to zero. And so there's clearly a need, right, to work very hard at coming up with practical solutions. So I don't think that I've got the full solution to this problem, but we're certainly trying. So a few things we're doing that I think are moving in that direction is, number one, the privacy labels that we're working on, which are basically summaries of practices, are a lot easier in principle to digest. You can rely on generic technology that's available for mobile phone users, screen readers and the like. Not that those things are perfect, but people we talk to are relying on screen readers. And I don't know how they do it, but the level of dissatisfaction is not as high as I would have expected it to be.
Wow.
Not like people are super happy with those things, but better than nothing. And I certainly think that, when you've got privacy labels and those kinds of things, that's certainly, in the right direction in that regard. The more you reduce the amount of interactions required from users, like, doing the kind of things in the background that I described, the less of an onus you're placing on everyone, including who are, visually impaired, find it, even more challenging than regular users to engage in those. Another line of work that I've been engaged in, it's a little separate from this at this stage, but it might merge at some point, is we've done for about 12 years now, we've been doing work, I mentioned this, on natural language processing and privacy. We've done a lot of work at building, in particular, privacy assistants that read privacy policies and answer people's questions. And we've actually quite a bit of success in that. As you can imagine, Gen AI, helps us get there even closer, more closely. And that's a space we've been working in. So LLMs, we've been looking at LLMs since way before you heard about ChatGPT. Technologies have been around since 2017, 2016. So we've actually been quite successful using these technologies. Far from perfect again. There's room for improvement in that. But that's another avenue which I think can certainly help people who are impaired. Now, there are other types of impairments. And even if you can help people who are visually impaired, you're not helping everybody.
And that's true.
So it's a challenging issue. And these are populations at risk, right? So you've got to really work hard. And that's a very important research topic. Definitely. I wish I were working even more in, but at least not something that I'm completely ignoring. I think it's an important area to look at.
Well, that's a point and a food for thought for all the researchers that are listening, that accessibility options within the privacy field needs to be researched even more. Moving forward, I have a question.
I do need to tell you that I apologize about this, but I have a Zoom call in about 2 minutes.
Oh, well, this is my last question, so I'll be wrapping up after this. And my last question is, the IoT privacy infrastructure, is it a turning point between the relationship between consumers and businesses that could allow users to dictate the rules now, since the app basically says yes, no, and without any negotiation?
I would love this to be able to state, yes, absolutely, we're changing the world. The future will tell. We would love to see that happening. It's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, right? So the more people download our app, more businesses will say, we probably have to build something that works with this app. And obviously, the more businesses use our infrastructure and our portal, the more people will say, hey, it's really worth downloading this app. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. We're working with different players. We've worked with different entities, different entities out there. We're hoping moving forward to also work with different device manufacturers. So one way to lower the bar for data controllers is to make it as easy as a couple of clicks for them to say, I too have a Ring doorbell.
Yeah.
Why do you don't want to ask someone to read the privacy policy of the Ring doorbell and then, complete all these fields on themselves.
Yeah.
Been building templates. And then all you do is instantiate the template by saying, I also have one of those, right? Yeah. The data practices come directly from the vendor and the location where it's deployed. And then you do a couple of clicks and there you are, published it, right? So those are the kinds of things that we'd like to do more in the future.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Norman Sadeh, for joining me again today and discussing this privacy infrastructure. I learned a lot even after reading all of the resources available on the IoT privacy infrastructure. And I hope that my listeners as well got to learn more and see this as a new step towards their empowerment within the privacy field.
Thank you, Alexandria. I really enjoyed the podcast.
Just to remind my listeners that Dr. Norman Sadeh is a professor in the School of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon University, CMU, director of CMU's Mobile Commerce Laboratory and its e-Supply Chain Management Laboratory, and co-director of the MSIT Program in Privacy Engineering. He and his team have developed the IoT Privacy Infrastructure, and for those who are interested, I encourage you to check out the IoT Privacy Assistant in Google Play Store and Apple Play Store. This is your host, Alexandra Stanford, and as usual, wherever you are in the world, I bid you good day, good evening, and good night. Until next time, bye!